part of the things you're talking about is legalizing all drugs is like something you're pushing.
Much to the horror of a
bet.
lot of people in politics in general. But, if you want to talk about that in a while, sure, we could get into that, yeah.
For sure. Like, I guess, is it because you've looked over at countries like Sweden and maybe other countries that experimented with legalizing drugs and how the addiction rates have kind of gone down as a kind of effect of that? Is that something that you've, like, taken examples from, or...?
Well, it starts with this. Firstly, I suppose my political philosophy is I'm a libertarian. I, believe it or not, don't really have much faith in government. I don't like government. I don't like being told to obey rules and regulations. I do, because that's what, as a citizen, you must do. But I think there's more than enough to run our society. And I don't think the government actually helps, particularly in terms of making better families, helping business grow, etc. So really, I'm fairly anti-government. I've been in government, and my whole ethos in government was try and actually keep government under control and do what it had to do. I mean, we need government to do certain vital things for us, but I wanted to get government out of people's faces. So that's just a bit of background philosophically. So I'm a libertarian. So in terms of this drug issue, it comes back to the history of trying to ban stuff and create prohibitions. So there's a great experiment in America in the 1920s called Prohibition, where they said, right, we're going to ban alcohol. And it didn't just happen overnight. There's a long political history through the 1850s, 60s, 70s, through to the, around 1910, 1920, and they finally did this. And the reason was they thought that alcohol was causing all sorts of social problems. The men would come home, because they were the breadwinners, they would come home with a pay packet after spending most of it at the saloon or the pub, and coming home drunk, abusing the wife and the children, and then the wife having to try and make ends meet. And they had public drunkenness, and people were dying.
It was a huge issue, yeah.
Yeah, it was just a huge issue. And so these reformers at the time said, well, we've got to ban alcohol. And what happened? Well, we saw organised crime proliferate, syndicates created for the purpose of bringing alcohol into the States. We saw violent crime. We saw, things like Al Capone and the St. Valentine's Day massacre and things like that. We saw the corruption of the police forces. We saw the corruption, arguably, of the judiciary as well. We saw, ordinary, decent Americans who wouldn't have dreamed of breaking the law would break this particular law. So there was a nation of lawbreakers. And ironically, it became easier to buy a drink in New York during Prohibition than it was before and then after, when it was repealed. So what I'm saying to you is Prohibition didn't work for alcohol. It's not working for drugs. As I was saying, that our listeners might be thinking, well, what are the parallels? Well, there are lots of parallels. I mean, we're told that drugs are bad, they're evil, they're addictive. We ban them. But I say to you today, could we walk out of here within a kilometre of here and go and buy drugs? I don't know where to go, by the way. But I know
just to clarify,
some of you young fellas might, and your friends, you might know where to go.
I've heard of people.
And don't take. By the way, don't take drugs, kids. But look, drugs are arguably totally plentiful now, and they're cheap. And yes, we hear bad stories about people getting a bad one and dying, which is pretty scary and awful. And those are tragedies for those families. But drugs are plentiful, so we haven't actually curtailed usage. Those who want, if you want to take drugs, you can go and get them. So that's the first point. Next point is, I believe that we've seen again the corruption of our police forces. We've seen organised crime. And I'm deeply suspicious sometimes about what's going on in certain cases before the law, but that's probably about as much as I should say. But it hasn't worked. And so what we've got to do is we've got to treat it as a social issue, as a problem. We've got to regulate it. We've got to make sure that, that if drugs are available, they are under control, that they are, they're safe as much as you can make something like that safe. So look, usually at this point, my former political team, most of them would say he's deranged, but it's a pretense, really, in my view. Yeah. Political parties and politicians, they see it as something they just cannot say, they cannot agree to. Behind closed doors, occasionally you'll get people saying, "Yeah, well, you're sort of right." So that's where I'm coming from, anyway. Well, so it's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon
in our lifetime.
Because I don't think in my lifetime But again, my days might be numbered, mightn't they? Yeah. So, look, it's just politically too dangerous for people. And also there's the problem with it's not just Australia, but other jurisdictions, like, for example, the United States. If we tried to do something like this here, we'd have some very big problems, political and diplomatic problems with the United States, because they would see us as having a renegade sort of policy. But we do need drug law reform. That's an absolute given as far as I'm concerned. The laws don't work.
Is it the case of like shame? Like, it's almost like through science, we know that shaming doesn't fix things in the way that if you shame like addicts or you shame people that have a problem to kind of rid them from society, if anything, they double down on the bad behavior or what they're doing because they don't feel accepted anywhere. Like, even my own childhood, I had an amazing mother, so I was never really drawn to drugs as like an escapism. But watching my friends that either had like really strict parents or bad home lives, the whole idea of drugs, it was never about the drug itself. It was the rule breaking aspect. And kids are so driven for that. Don't go through that fence and go to the park over the road. It's not safe.
Absolutely, there's that. And look, the other thing I just to quickly draw back to that Prohibition example, the historical example, I said that what happened during Prohibition in America was that vast numbers of people who would always observe the law became lawbreakers by definition. Well, we've got the same thing here. Look, often in this debate, drug taking is characterised as the young in the community. Well, that is complete BS, because let's face it, there are
young people from the 70s. Well,
look, there are people in their 60s in this town who are pillars of the community, highly respected careers in the professions, for example, who do. There are, I know many young women in their 40s, that's a young woman for me, who in a circle of friends associated with my family, but I know some of those women are into them as well. And frankly, I think that's crazy, at that sort of stage in life. But the point is, it's not just the young, it's throughout our community. And the old in the community, the older people are hypocrites by then just trying to point the finger at younger people and say, it's them, they're taking it. That's rubbish. Is
it a case of like that may be like because I feel like if you went up to most people on the street, their opinion would be similar to yours. They're like, that makes sense. If you explained all the points, I can understand that. But then it takes so long for government to kind of uptake that, or whether like use gay marriage as an example, like you could have said years before people had come to accept it and it was part of society. But then for the laws to change is always there's such a delay.
There is, and it's interesting, but sometimes sort of the dam breaks. So